Joseph Smith.
Joseph Smith.
Joseph Smith. Just making sure I told my wife right. Joseph Smith. So, did everybody bring your Book of Mormons? Anybody bring your Book of Mormons? You left yours in the closet? You don't have one?
I just got King James.
Praise God. Praise God. Whatever you need. Well, that's fine, because I didn't bring one either. But we're going to talk about old Joseph Smith. So we're talking about Mormons here for the next couple of weeks, as we did with the Jehovah's Witness and the various other ones. When we have a founder, we're going to talk about the founder one week, and then we'll talk about what they believe, coming up. So this looks like it's going to be a three-parter. The more I read, the more I can't help but bring to you next, without cramming it all into like an hour-and-a-half session. I'm trying not to do that to you. So Joseph Smith today, we'll talk about the LDS church next week, and finally the last week we'll talk about what they believe and all those wonderful questions that you people have about, holy underwear and bicycles and, Pioneer Day and all these things that you guys asked me last week to look up. So that'll all be in there on the last week when we talk about what they believe. So tonight, I've lost my page already, but that's all right. Tonight we're going to talk about Joseph Smith. Does anybody know anything about Joseph Smith? Does anybody even know who I'm talking about when I say Joseph Smith? Anybody know? Not John Doe, Joseph Smith. Nothing? Nobody knows nothing. Okay, well, this should be good. He was a mathematician. No, see, you have no idea. You really have no idea. Okay. He was a young fellow, born in the 18-somethings, and died in the 18-somethings, and he had a very, very interesting life for the 1800s. People want to talk about he was persecuted for his beliefs and therefore killed for his beliefs. But I feel like he could have been in our family, no offense to, any of my family members, but, the man was a cheat and a thief and a liar and a crook and I'm saying, like, he could have fit in with my family, I have all my hillbilly, I'll say, West Virginia family, because, they're in the mountains, mountain people, you know what I'm saying? It's just their backwards ways, if you want to call it that way, of things that happen in the mountain. Now praise God, most of my family is saved and got out of that, but there's still some that are, but, hearing the stories that they tell back when they were younger, and the stories of family and stuff, they're just old, weird ways. So,
the end justifies the means type thing.
Yeah, the ends justifies the means is a good way to put old Joseph Smith. And so he died. He was shot. You remember old Bonnie and Clyde? Anybody know how Bonnie and Clyde ended? And they just waited for him and shot him. Yeah, it's kind of something similar. And they made sure he was dead. It was pretty bad. But it had nothing to do, minimal to do with the fact that he was Mormon, and so much to do with so many other things. So anyways, I want to read you about Joseph Smith here. This is just his moment where he got the beginning of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, okay? And I'm going to ask you if this sounds familiar in a little bit. It says, he went out to the woods to pray. This is where it starts. Why he went out to the woods to pray, we'll talk about that here in a minute. But he went out to the woods to pray. He says, I knelt down and began to offer up the desire of my heart to God. So far, so good. Yeah. I had scarcely done so when immediately I was seized upon by some power which entirely overcame me and had such an astonishing influence over me as to bind my tongue so that I could not speak. Oh boy. Thick darkness gathered around me, and it seemed to me for a time as if I were doomed to sudden destruction. Does this sound familiar? Yes, sir?
Is his name Muhammad?
His name's not Muhammad, it's Joseph Smith, but boy, it does sound a little bit like Muhammad, don't it?
Yeah.
When he had his encounter with Gabriel, I think is eventually who they determined it was, and he was struck with fear and pressed to the point that he thought he was just not going to make it, and it was a darkness and a fear, and he trembled. You remember this? So much it was so bad. Like at one point, he talked about throwing himself off a mountain. It was bad. Well, old Joseph Smith, He was pressed to the point that he thought his days were going to end. But exerting all my power to call upon God to deliver me out of the power of this enemy, which had seized upon me, and at the very moment when I was ready to sink into despair and abandon myself to destruction, not to an imaginary ruin, but to the power of some actual being from the unseen world who had such marvelous power as I had never felt before in any being. Just at this moment of great alarm, I saw a pillar of light exactly over my head, above the brightness of the sun, which descended gradually until it fell upon me. It no sooner appeared than I found myself delivered from the enemy which held me bound. When the light rested upon me, I saw persons, two images, we'll say it that way, people, whose brightness and glory defy all description, standing above me in the air. One of them spake unto me, calling me by name, and said, pointing to the other, "This is my beloved Son, hear him." My object in going to inquire of the Lord was to know which of all the sects or Christian churches, sects, S-E-C-T-S, was right, that I might know which to join. No sooner, therefore, did I get possession of myself, so as to be able to speak, then I asked the persons who stood above me in the light, which of all the churches was right, as in denominations, which of all the churches was right, and which I should join. I was answered, I'm skipping some here. I was answered that I must join none of them, for they were all wrong. And the persons who addressed me said that all of their creeds were an abomination in his sight, and that all their teachers were corrupt. Ooh. So, he was surrounded by churches. The Methodist Church was big back in this time. They were having a great revival, a great awakening in his time. A big revival, religious time was going on, if you will, in the churches. And so he claims he went to the woods to pray. He knelt down to ask, the point was to seek God and ask which denomination, which church should I go to, because they all have just a little something different about them, and which one's the right one. And according to him, it sounds to be like God and or Jesus both somehow visited him and told him that none of them were any good, that he wasn't to join any of them, that they were all abominations, and that their teachers were corrupt. So he started his own. Wow. These people that seem to be visited from, I don't know, creatures, beings, what have you, and told that, like, the Christian religion, the Jewish religion, the whatever, this denomination, that denomination, start your own. Man, that's a lot, isn't it? I mean, it's a lot. It really is. So, anyways, that's basically the gist of it. Now, there's a few things you need to know about old Joe. He was a weirdo. Like, again, these backwoods, back country things that they did. Well, let's see if I can get you some stuff here. We'll go back to the way things were, the way he prayed in the woods and all that in a little bit. Let's see here. Where do I want to give you? The Smith family was involved in something called religious folk magic.
Religious what?
Folk, F-O-L-K, religious folk magic, how do you say that word? And it was apparently a relatively common practice in the day. And they would take these stones, they called them seer stones. Matter of fact, Chip, if you don't mind, if you would look up on the internet while you're back there, Seer stone, Joseph Smith Seer stone, they'll show you his exact stone that he used for translating the Book of Mormon into English. have to turn off the main just to bring it over, but we'll see it. Anyways, a seer stone. And he would use this seer stone to somehow find hidden or buried treasure behind or under rocks or trees or under the earth or in caves or wherever it was located at. He would use this stone to find treasure, and he was apparently had a reputation for being really good at it.
Wow.
But he never did find no treasure.
Oh,
You're right. And in the sense that he was so good at it, or had such a good reputation at it, him and his extremely large family that spread the word of how good he was at the seer stone stuff, that he would get hired out by wealthy people to help them find lost and buried treasure. And he was a real good salesman of the idea, though he never really found any treasure. So much so that he was taken to court and charged for fraud and things of that nature. Now, the one on the left here, the brown and black one, is supposed to be the seer stone that he used to translate the Book of Mormon. And he quite literally would he would put it in his hat, like a top hat, if you would, He put it in his hat, and he'd bury his face in the hat, and he'd stare at the stone, to get all the other light and distractions out. Right? I see you rubbing your face, like, are you serious? And he'd bury his head in his hat, the hat hanging in his stuff, until he got the translation. Oh, hey, there you go. The more I tell it, the more Chip sees pictures back there. It's like, oh, this is it. Until he got to, and so somebody, his scribe, would write down what he said while he had his head quite literally buried in the hat, in complete darkness, except for him and the stone.
Off that stuff.
Was that?
Off that stuff.
Off of that specific brown with black swirls stone.
So why are we calling it a stone?
It's a rock.
Just a little pebble or something. I mean, it
Yeah,
don't
it's
look very big.
rock.
It's
It's a rock.
his hat. I thought when you said
But-
stone,
Right, so everybody's thinking, but that literally is what they're called, as seer stones. Like in the Old Testament, we would have seers. We would call them prophets, right? They would be able to see the future or see what you were doing, and they would call you out. Like Jesus, when he was like, "Hey, I saw you under the tree," and they was like, "What?" And his disciples followed him, Andrew or one of them. Anyhow, so similar to that, but they used stones, and it was again considered magic, because they would use these stones and other things back in the day. Okay, and yeah. So here's the thing: his life was so crazy that not only did he use seer stones, and he goes to court to be convicted, but he was arrested multiple times. He escaped several times, and it was in the act of trying to escape the last time that he eventually gets shot. But he started a bank. He got all his followers, and I don't exactly understand how this guy, he had to be extremely charismatic in the way that he was able to, just a great salesman, again, like the Korean Messiah, right? He had to be just this great auditor and salesman in the way he spoke and draw people in, because his followers, immediately he gained thousands of followers. I mean, just boom. And by the time he was dead and literally shot, he had thousands of followers. According to this, tens of thousands of followers. You understand? He amassed a multitude of people in roughly 14 years. I mean, it's pretty quick, especially back in the day when you're not on TV or the YouTube or internet or anything like that, right? Well, he convinced all his people that he was going to start a bank, and they were going to have their own bank, and it was going to be backed by property, and they were going to have their own currency. Matter of fact, they were going to make their own nation. You got to understand, this is when we're still making the West America. We're going out west into the Indian territories and things of that nature. You understand? 1820s, 1830s, 1840s. And so he's going to try and be an independent state unto himself, him and his people, and start a bank. Well, the bank failed. He got all the people in his community, his followers, to give him their money, and he would exchange it for the bank currency. Well, nobody took the currency. Nobody took this mess. And the bank failed. So then there was all this property that was behind, and people were bankrupt like crazy because the bank went under. So there was a split. He lost some followers. Some creditors were after him. Again, fraud. Yeah. Treason. He was accused of treason. He was accused of treason and tried to be arrested for treason. There was an escape. One day, eventually, he was arrested for some simple crimes, and so he turned himself in. Well, once they got him, then they charged him with treason, so he couldn't run away. Right? None of this sounds anything to do with religious persecution, does it? No. He was gonna build Zion and again be a state unto himself and have their own government, have their own militia, have their own everything. And he was successful in a lot of the things that he did in getting it set up. But then once it came time to run it, it fell to the ground. Absolute failure, which caused a lot of problems, as you can imagine. Especially since there was a lot of money involved in the things he was doing. So, he was so charismatic that somehow, he convinced a bunch of women to be his wives, even though he had a wife. You know what I mean? Like it was, like I understand maybe one or two, maybe 3, 4, but no, I'm talking about 50-ish. Again, in a matter of maybe 10 years. Like I don't know.
But no red Kool-Aid involved.
No red Kool-Aid. No. No red Kool-Aid. No red Kool-Aid. Yeah, no red Kool-Aid. So, there was just a lot. So, I just want to talk to you, just put this into understanding about what he said he believed, that these two persons visited him, the light and the darkness, and he was about to succumb to it and die, and the light came down and relieved him. Okay, so you remember what we just read a few minutes ago. All right, so we're just going to go through a couple of things. So this is how this thing worked over the years. First off, he said 1820. 1820 is when this thing was supposed to kick off, and he was supposed to have had this prayer time in the woods about 1820. Now again, they didn't write it down. You don't exactly remember what day it was or exactly how old he was. Some days he's 14 when he tells the story. Some days he's 16 when he tells the story. Because you don't remember exactly important things that happened to you, like, God visiting you in the woods. No, that's stupid. Nobody remembers that stuff. Okay, so, just a couple of complications here. Joseph claimed that his idea to pray came as a result of unusual religious excitement in his hometown. However, these revivals or unusual religious excitement didn't happen until 1823 or 1824, 3 or 4 years after he went to pray. So there's number one. Number two, he changed his first vision story significantly throughout his life. The story became significantly more embellished over time, and it also changes as his own theology changes. For the first several years he told the story, Joseph was only visited by a single person. So I just told you this one, he was visited by 2 personages. I can't say that word very well. 2 personages. I think I said it right. Okay, well, when he first told the story, it was just an angel. Just one angel. Later, the story grew from being an angel to being the Lord. Still just one, but it was God himself that visited him. And this stuck with him because of his Trinitarian views. He still believed God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit, 3 in 1. So when God visited as a singular being. And so it went from an angel to being the Lord. Well, then it went from the angel and then the Lord to then being God and Jesus, because his beliefs changed into the Trinity was not the Trinity. They were actually 3 separate persons. And so God physically visited him, and he's the one pointing to Jesus saying, this is my son, who physically also was there. And 2 separate beings as 2 separate entities. Well, boy. After Joseph changed his story to include two personages, the story also changed over time regarding the order of presentation. In 1935, two unidentified people appeared in succession. In 1938, two people appeared together. So in the first version, he was appeared, one person showed up, and then the next person showed up. Later, they both showed up at the same time. Get your story straight, Joseph. Come on, get it right. Okay? Then we get the fact that you remember this demonic evil power was getting ready to overtake him, and he couldn't even speak, and that's all he could do to even cry out to God. Yet later on, that was gone. That part wasn't there. No evil. Everything was great. Let's see here. In one of the versions that he told in the story, he was surrounded by angels. It wasn't just an angel. It wasn't then two people. It wasn't God and Jesus. It was a whole host of angels. Okay? His motives for praying changed over time. Originally, his motives were to obtain forgiveness for his sins. So in the original story that he told, that this vision that he had while he was out in the woods, he went out in the woods to pray to ask God for forgiveness of his sins. And he was visited. Well, then later, because he was trying to figure out which denomination was the true church. And then even later, he was told that none of the denominations were the true church, and you need to start your own. It just kept, the word would be evolving. We've heard that around here lately, over the last couple of years, about people's thoughts about the Bible evolving. Well, I want to let you know, the Mormons really believe in evolution in a totally different way that you've never even thought of before, which is really, really wild. Okay. So, let's see, is there anyone else I want to tell you else? Yeah, I think we'll leave it there. All right, so as you see, it changed multiple times. Now, this thing was supposed to happen in 1820, and by 1844, he's dead. So in a matter of 24 years, and he didn't write it down for the first 10 years. It was like the first 9. This thing changed however many times I just said it, but it continuously changed. As a matter of fact, as he began to write stuff down that was supposed to be scripture, even that was abridged and amended and changed. Right. So in the matter of 24 years, roughly.
This is Mormon, right?
Mormons, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it wasn't just once and done. It was writing and rewriting, telling and retelling, changing and more changing and more changing and more changing. Now, I want you to grasp this before we move on to the church next week and the beliefs. This is interesting. He claims he was led to a golden book, if I could say it that way. It was the way they describe it. Can you pull it up for me if you don't mind? It's like this giant 3-ring binder with gold plates that were etched. There you go. Good job, sir. These are golden pages, golden tablets, golden whatever, this big giant 3-ring binder. And this is not it, by the way. It doesn't exist. This is just, that's even better. So, yeah. And he was led to this book that was taken down and written by Mormon, a person, an entity, a being named Mormon. So this is the Book of Mormon. Some dude who got this way before Joseph Smith got it. Joseph Smith was led to it by an angel or God or whatever the being is. Moroni pops up in there. There's another angel. There are personages that pop up in there. And he found this buried, because he was a seer person that could find things with this little magic stone. And but the angel let him do it, and he unburied it. and he got it, and it was written in some foreign language that doesn't exist, that nobody's ever seen throughout all time. Some different type Egyptian stuff. I forget what it is called.
Hieroglyphics.
Right, yeah, but it's like literally he calls it something like modified Egyptian or something. Anyways, and it had to be translated, and he was told to translate it into English so that we could receive this revelation, again with these revelations, the final words, the better words, the uncorrupted words of God, kind of. So he went to take it, he couldn't take it. Wasn't allowed. So he tried to do this 4 times. He tried to go get it 4 times. And 4 times he couldn't get it. Until he got married between time 3 and time 4. And he went back with his wife, and then he was allowed to have it. So that plays into part of the reason that Mormons have to be married to be able to make it to, I want to call it heaven for the time being, but it ain't heaven. Okay? Or else they got problems. So they're big on family. Anyways, right? It's really weird. It's really weird. And so he took this and he took it back, and I guess word got out that he got this golden tablet book paper thing. And so some of those other people that had hired him to be a treasure hunter, that he didn't find nothing, then they thought, oh, you held out on us. You actually did find treasure and led us to other places that there wasn't anything. And so then they went after him and, ransacked his place and did all this stuff trying to find this gold tablet. Nobody ever actually saw it except for some people who claimed they saw it, and they wrote an affidavit saying, I saw it. Some of them, of course, eventually were excommunicated and blah, blah, blah. But there was a falling out again. All these falling outs. So he translated it through a language that doesn't exist, or from a language that doesn't exist, into English. But most of the time he had his head in a hat looking at a stone. And at one point in time, he got it taken away from him. The angel got mad at him and took it back from him because he had translated some 160 pages or so, gave it to a buddy of his to spread to some people that he knew, and the buddy lost the 160 some translated pages. So the angel got mad and took it away.
Wow.
And then like a month later, the angel gave it back to him. And they started again. Now this is some weird stuff. I tell you these things to understand who this man is. How crazy of a salesman does he have to be for you to still hang in there and follow this man? Just from the little bit I told you. Right?
So he's conceding that this existed prior to him creating his religion that he was told to create.
100%. It's all from this book.
Right.
Yeah.
So he
From
did-
a person or angel or
Right.
being that received it and took it down and hid it in the earth. And they were, like, we would call them a Native American, but they were Native American European kind of person. It's really, really strange. Because, Jesus was crucified and he rose again. And then he came to America to give the Indians the real gospel. So that's how come the book was over here in America and not over there where Jesus was. It's, again, it gets stranger and stranger, and it's wrote in a language that Jesus didn't speak. Anyways, it gets really, really weird, and we're going to get into some of that later. So just, put all this stuff in your head. But again, just trying to wrap around Joseph Smith. He was a strange, strange dude. Strange dude. And his ending comes tragically. He goes to jail, and while he's in jail, they get him for treason and charge him with treason. So now it's a big crime. He can't leave. He can't post bond. He can't get away. His lawyer can't get him out. He has to stand trial. They got him. Well, he's staying in like the jailer's bedroom or something. There's no bars on the window or anything. He's in there. Him and his brother. And again, big follower, big part of his getting this religion going. Hiram or whatever his name was. Anyways, and some people come in to kill him. And his brother goes for the door to try to shut the door and barricade the door, and his brother gets shot instantly in the head. He's dead. And Joseph Smith has this 3-shot, like they call it like a pickle gun or something. I forget the name of it. It's a weird thing. But basically, it's 3 barrels. You can shoot, rotate it's like a revolver, but you rotate the whole barrel manually. So you pull the trigger, shoot, rotate the barrel, shoot. So he got 3 shots off and wounded some people real quick and tried to jump out the window after shooting. And when he did, people shot him as he was going out the window. And then the crowd, and like he was surrounded by mobs a lot of his life. Again, not much for being a Mormon, more so because he owed people money and failed business ventures and things like that. Anyways, they went out as he was on the ground behind him and shot him like
No doubt.
a dozen times. Like they made sure he was dead. Him and his followers and his people, they got excommunicated or they got kicked out and banned from states. Like they'd start up a thing in this state, things would go wrong, the business ventures would fail, and people would want to, like, again, he just wanted to go to treason multiple times. People wanted to hang him for treason. And so the governor, the mayor, whoever of the towns and states would kick him out. And then he got kicked out of whole states and had to go to these other states and start again. And just forfeit the property and everything that he started in that state. Again, it wasn't necessarily, you talk to Mormons, they'll say, oh yeah, he was persecuted for his faith and for his religion. And he was a prophet that was persecuted. They believe he was a prophet now. Yeah, no, he had bad business dealings. He was a womanizer. He was always trying to find treasure and get rich quick. And a good way to know is look at the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints today, and you'll find that they own so much property. It's hard for the people that are in charge to know what they own because they buy so much stuff and sell so much stuff. They're constantly buying and selling and buying and selling. And if you look at Utah, where their headquarters where they are, and compare Utah and compare the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints to the rest of the United States, they got some of the worst bankruptcy and creditors, and like it's the worst is in Utah. Their business dealings is terrible. Their marriage is terrible. Their suicides are terrible. Like everything, the numbers, the statistics in Utah are way worse than anywhere around the whole United States because of this religion and because of their terrible business dealings. They're just a mess. They're just an absolute mess. So they're constantly buying and selling and moving and picking things up and anyhow. So they believe he was a prophet. They claim he was a prophet, though they being the church, will never write down and publish all his prophecies. The best we can conclude is he has some 30 to 40 prophecies, and of those 30 or 40 prophecies, about 5 look like they ever came true. So he's about 5 for 30, maybe 5 for 40.
Good guess.
Right, I mean, I listen to some news on the radio. They predict some things that are coming. It's real easy if you know the times. He was a big political figure. Now, he was a huge political figure. This is the reason I say this. So you listen to some political figures on the radio. They can give a good prediction of what's coming. You listen to some economists. They can give a good prediction of what's coming. Like, if you're in the know and you're paying attention to what's going on in the world, you can give a good prediction about what's happening with money or politics or the presidency or the office or the courts or the laws or, who's going to get elected, around here, what's going on. And so he made some prophecies, again, about 5 for 30, 5 for 40.
You won't cut on spread.
That is not even like 50-50.
Yeah.
And of course, the Bible is very clear about a prophet who doesn't get stuff right. He's to be killed. He's to be stoned. He's to be put to death. So, anyways, there was church breakups because there was several men that thought that he was trying to marry their wives. There was people that left his church. Again, we're talking 24 years worth here. Right, he had all kinds of stuff going on in his life. And that was Joseph Smith. He was very charismatic. He could sell ice to an Eskimo. I mean, really, as they say. He was really, really good. And he gained followers everywhere he went. but he lost followers everywhere he went. He kicked people out. He was kicked out of states. Like, we would call him a charlatan. We would call him one of these fly-by-night guys. These snake oil salesmen. Like, we would use these terminologies to say this is who he was, and we would run him out of town. And several times he did get run out of town, and it didn't matter. Like, we don't ask the snake oil salesman, "Hey, what religion are you?" We could care less. You're taking people's money and you're selling stuff and promising false promises. Like, you run them out of town because of what they're selling, and they're selling fake hoods and falsehoods, regardless of whether they're Lutheran or Mormon or Episcopalian or whatever. It doesn't matter.
WC feels like character.
Yeah, WC feels like character. So, anyways, that's really who Joseph Smith was. But man, they thought he was. They thought he was something. They really did. They really did. And he told the people, and this is why I think that they thought he was something, is because he convinced the people, he sold the people that they could be gods. Right. And we'll get into that when we get into the beliefs and things of that nature. But if you just think about all the Mormons that you know today, they're all striving to be God of their own planet. I could almost didn't laugh. Could almost keep a straight face. They all believe they're going to be gods of their own planet. I'll leave you with that nugget. Next week, the LDS church and all the stuff that goes on there. We might get into the bicycle people, as some of you guys call them, next week, because that kind of goes hand in hand. And then after that, we'll talk about what it is, all these different beliefs and where they come from, and what's with the holy underwear. All right. Any questions tonight? Yes, sir?
Where does that Brigham Young got to me?
Yeah, so Brigham Young was a follower of Joseph Smith, and Brigham Young comes in. I'm going to say if Joseph Smith died in 44, he maybe comes in maybe 40, 38, somewhere around there, and he was with them for a good little while. And Brigham Young came up through the ranks. He was given a position, head of the disciples or something like that. Anyways, and when Joseph Smith was killed, Brigham Young they voted him basically to take over. There was several different people there, and several different followers. There's even like a Reform LDS. There's an RLDS church instead of just LDS. So there's a couple like branches. But Brigham Young ended up taking the majority of the people and starting the whole thing, and he moved it all to Utah, and we got Brigham Young University, and we got all the different things from him. He also had some weird stones and some things, some talismans, and like they made canes from the coffins of Joseph Smith that were considered from the wood, not just from the coffin, but the wood that they carried him on before they buried him in the coffins. Then they what does he call it? Exhumed him. They dug him back up and they moved him, and that wood that they used to carry, they made more canes. I think they could have kept going and they could have sold all kinds of stuff. But anyways, they made these canes, and the one that I saw had like an ivory handle, and in the ivory handle, in the ivory handle was a lock of Joseph Smith's hair. And those canes were supposedly healing canes, and then if you use that cane in any of your services or prayers or whatever it is, it would heal people. What did we say it was? Backwards mountain traditions. Weird voodoo, magical mountain folk, whatever. But yeah, so Brigham Young comes in there. Basically, he was moving up the ranks. He was taking up stuff right when Joseph Smith died. So anybody want to watch football or anything, BYU, right? We know BYU. That's Brigham Young University. That's the Mormons. That's what that is.
I didn't know that.
So you send your kid off to BYU, he's going to come back saying Joseph Smith, or Brigham Young, I don't know. Anyways, but also one of the higher ups, one of the big guys, and very racist. Let me just throw that out there. BYU, he was very racist. If you had a baby with another that wasn't white, he's going to kill you. Like, you were not allowed to have interracial relationships and interracial children. Yeah, he did. He was going to be put down. He finally did it. Like, he didn't play with that stuff. And for the longest time, the Mormon was considered whites only until one of the new prophets came by and said, okay, it's okay for black people now to receive, grace. And I'm saying recently, like just recently. Anyway, we'll get into it. I don't know what it is about being I'm going to call it a cult, but just because it's a term that we can understand. But I don't know what it is about being a cult leader. We joked about it last week, but you got to have multiple wives. You got to be racist. You got to have followers. You got to be persecuted. There's all these strange things that you got to do. You got to be eccentric or charismatic, or you know what I mean. There's all these, and you got to have a little weird, thing. The Korean Messiah, he was somehow better than Jesus. Joseph Smith. You're all going to be gods. Congratulations of your own planet. You get Mars, you get Jupiter, you get Venus, whatever. But yeah. I mean, he even said there was Quakers. You asked about the Quakers, right? There's Quakers on the moon.
Wow.
And then they needed to be given the truth. They needed to spread the gospel to the Quakers on the moon. And Brigham Young backed them up. I'm telling you, on the moon.
He must have been
Right? You think he was smoking something?
Yeah.
But these were visions from somebody. All right.
So they don't go along with the baptism and communion.
Yeah, they actually take communion. It's water.
Wow.
We'll get into that when they get into their beliefs, but that's funny. Yes, sir.
Hey, you said one of his favorite tactics was trying to convince people that they could become gods.
Yeah.
But that sounds an awful lot like the serpent talking to Eve in the garden.
Oh, Chip, no, you didn't steal it from me already. I got it wrote in here when we get to the beliefs, but that's good, that's beautiful. Yes, back in the Old Testament, in the very beginning, it's the same old thing from the very beginning. Same thing. That's why it's so very successful today, I believe. Because don't you want to be God?
No.
Then you can just skip all this other stuff. You don't have to rely on anything else or anybody else. If you just be good enough, you can be God of your own planet. And have, goddesses.
It sounds like you're already out there, but.
And it's a bunch of them. I don't know if it's 70, 90. I don't know how many different goddesses that they get to have in the afterlife to be able to repopulate this or populate the planet with their own likeness. But again, it's a bunch of them.
That's what I see with all religions. Naturally, you want a free pass, but you got to accept the fact and admit that you're wrong and ask for forgiveness.
Right.
That comes with it. That's anyway bypassing.
A lot of people have a hard time with that.
Yeah.
I've
Folks.
seen it from myself.
No doubt. All right. Any other questions about Joseph Smith tonight, or Brigham Young, or Seer stones, or anything like that?
I just want to say one thing. We had a doctor up here in West Wisconsin that left to go to Salt Lake City to practice last year.
Yeah.
We had to give him
April Jones.
April Jones, her husband, they moved out to Salt Lake City. I said,
But we
wow.
talked about God, and she's,
Yeah.
Listen, I know some really, really good Mormon people. They're super nice, super great, super successful. They help you in any way they can, give you a shirt off the back. I mean, super nice folks going straight to him.
While I watched that, Stephen Lady
Yeah,
from Utah.
yeah.
It comes on our TV.
Well, I don't know how much that's doctrine, according to what they believe. It's a lot of drama, but still, made for TV. That's right. It's made to keep your interest. But there's a lot of good Mormon folks out there. And listen, I have sit down and talked to some of them and tried to get the Bible and get scripture to them. I mean, how do you come from, you're not going to be God. You're a sinner in need of a Savior. No. I'm going to populate the planet. I'm going to be God. No, you're not. I mean, how do you come off of that? It's very difficult. It's very, very difficult. So anyway, all right. Enough said. We'll get into it more next week. Fun stuff, guys. Fun stuff. He was a very, very weird guy. Very weird guy. All right.